When the Hebrew SeniorLife Search Committee interviewed Lou Woolf for the job as president, they were a little surprised that he brought up his experience working with the Children's Television Workshop as a relevant qualification. But wait, he told them, Sesame Street and the Muppets gave kids a lot of credit for what they could understand and enjoy. HSL does the same thing for older adults, having high expectations about what's possible. In this episode of the HealthBiz podcast, Lou talks about the role his father and brother played in his upbringing, how he brought the discipline of marketing to consumer goods and then to healthcare, and what it's been like to lead the various service lines at HSL. We talked about the challenges of the past couple of years and Lou's ambition to develop a dementia care center of excellence to do Boston proud. I'm David Williams, host of the HealthBiz podcast and president of Health Business Group, a strategy consulting firm that helps organizations like HSL develop robust growth plans. Reach out to me, dwilliams@healthbusinessgroup.com, if you'd like to discuss strategy for your organization. And finally, please do me a favor and subscribe to the Health Biz Podcast. Lou Woolf, President and CEO of Hebrew SeniorLife. Welcome to the Health Biz Podcast.
Thank you so much, Dave. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Well, we're going to talk about HSL a little later here in the show, but I want to start off and ask you about your background. What was your upbringing like? Any major childhood influences that have stuck with you?
Yeah, I would say definitely. So I grew up in Worcester, Massachusetts, and I would say my father had a big influence on me. My brother had a big influence for very different reasons. My father was somebody who had a great sense of optimism. And really focused on the positives and always wanting to do things better. And that rubbed off on me quite a bit. And my brother was an incredible high achiever and somebody who really held the bar high for me through his work and his real success at an early age.
What was the difference in age between you and your brother?
My brother was 3 years older than me. And so we were very close. We actually went to Brandeis together. He was a senior, I was a freshman, and he was a fourth year medical student at Columbia when I was at the business school there. So we were very close.
Very nice. Well, you partly got to my next question about, what did you study? How did you decide where to go? And, and then what did you start off in terms of your early career?
So that really, in my case, that sometimes when people answer that, I think it can be very disjointed. They look back and it doesn't really bear a lot of relationship to what they're doing now.
Yeah.
In my case, that's really not the case. So I went to Brandeis. I was an economics major. And early on, I got very taken by the part of economics that was really looking at consumer behaviors and what motivated people. I then went to Columbia Business School and got a degree in marketing. And this was the late 70s. And at that time, marketing was really changing from selling things to really understanding consumer needs and doing research and understanding what were unfulfilled needs and what kinds of products you could develop to satisfy those needs. I then went on to work at Gillette and General Mills for 5 years in consumer packaged goods, selling shave cream and shampoo and deodorants at Gillette. And then for Parker Brothers, the subsidiary of General Mills at the time, looking at children's games and music and computer games and things. And I always looked through the lens of consumers and what their needs were. Early on, when I was at Parker Brothers, I did a lot of work with Children's Television Workshop and the makers of Sesame Street and Muppets. And
yeah,
they had a totally different perspective on children than most people. And they really gave children a lot more credit. And they always talked about how in the Muppets, there's all this sarcastic humor and there's the two guys in the balcony in the theater. And
yeah,
people always thought that was for adults. So adults wouldn't mind going to a Muppets movie. And they really taught us that children have much more capabilities than anybody gives them credit for. And that all of that is for children, learning subtleties, learning how to integrate with people, learning nuances of language. So as my career went along, I evolved from doing that into healthcare because I was always focused on consumer needs. And I continued to be attracted to more important consumer needs. So the sequence of my career was I worked for New England Baptist Hospital, which was elective orthopedics, and then I worked at a community hospital, all in executive positions. And then I was introduced to HealthBiz SeniorLife. And it's always been about more and more important consumer needs and the ability to help fulfill those needs. So I really think that that was the germ of my education, and it's continued to lead me through my career.
It's interesting what you say all about it, but of course the Muppets and now Sesame Street. I think my mother said I was watching it for when they were building it in the late '60s. There, I think she meant it more or less literally. And I always thought that those things that they had in in the Muppets and some other place were sort of for the adults. But it is very interesting what you say about that, and interesting. And I wonder if there's any parallels then when we start talking about HSL and about sometimes older people aren't given as much credit as they might be for what they are doing and observing and how they and how they feel.
Totally. It's absolutely the case. Whenever you want to talk about that, that came up in my interview when I was interviewing for the position here, and I drew that parallel for the search committee, and they were fascinated by it. I think it made a real impression.
Good. Well, on the earlier career piece, when you talk about consumer needs and healthcare, certainly, as you're saying, when you were getting into marketing, it was shifting what it was doing, and then healthcare has more slowly shifted about caring about the consumer needs. I think about New England Baptist, maybe in the days that you were there, as being one of the earlier ones that did focus more on kind of the consumer. Was that the case, or?
Absolutely. When I left the job at General Mills, I started a small consulting firm with some friends, and we did work around magnetic resonance imaging and CAT scanning when it was when MRI was brand new. And I worked with the Baptist, and they had an idea in the mid 90s to convert to an orthopedic center of excellence, which they perceived as primarily a marketing exercise because they were already about a third orthopedics. And I was hired as the vice president of business development to work with the physician leadership on evolving the Baptist into an orthopedic center of excellence. So that was absolutely the case.
Yeah, no, that's my impression. A lot of great healthcare facilities in the Boston area, but they're not all as well known, or at least as early known for the consumer side of it. So that's interesting. So you talked about when you were introduced to HSL, HealthBiz SeniorLife. How did that happen? What was the process like of coming over into that organization?
So I had been at North Shore Medical Center for 7 years, and North Shore Medical Center is located in Salem and Lynn, Massachusetts, and it's a community hospital, a very high-level community hospital that serves a population on one side of Salem and Lynn that is a very needy population. So I was called one day by a recruiter who knew me and said, "This is probably the furthest thing from your mind, but I know you and I know this organization, and I think it would be a great match," and described this position as the president of HealthBiz SeniorLife, reporting up to the CEO, who currently at that time had the job of overall president and CEO. And the board had decided to divide the job up and have a position as president that would report to the CEO along with research and fundraising. So the president job was pretty much, all operations. And the recruiter said to me, "Let me tell you a little bit about it. Look at the website tonight, and if you're not interested, call me in the morning." And I looked at the website, and it was very much, as you pointed out, it was an organization that viewed seniors much differently than other people. It was one that really viewed people as having potential and respect, and this is the group of people that we owed so much to, and really looked to change the way people age in a very respectful way. Harvard Medical School affiliation, a lot of research and teaching. And I was fascinated by it and really moved at the mission and the commitment of the organization. And then the next day, I actually drove around and I looked at a number of the communities. I was interested in seeing what they look like. And then I decided I was very interested.
So, HSL is clearly serving a broad set of people, and you have different sort of services. So it's not just a rehab, it's not just a nursing home. It's not what can you just sort of paint a picture of, what comprises the whole thing you mentioned? Research, of course.
Right. It's a very good point. You can look throughout the country at organizations like ours, and you will never find an organization that says got the breadth that we do. So we started as a nursing home organization 120 years ago. And for the first 60 years, it really was focusing on long-term care, what people think of as a skilled nursing facility. Over the last 60 years, the organization in the mid-60s started a research institute because there was a sense that there were many people in nursing homes that didn't have to be in nursing homes. And there was a sense that really we could look at other kinds of living arrangements, other levels of support that would both enrich people's lives and be less of a burden on government payers. So fast forward to today, we have 2 continuing care retirement communities, which are market rate, independent living, assisted living, and long-term care. We have 5 affordable housing communities with about 1,000 seniors, which is really low income, a little bit of market, but modest market. We have inpatient short-term rehab. We have over about 700 people in still that kind of traditional long-term care type facility. And we have, I think, 10 home and community-based services, including short-term rehab home care, activities of daily life home care, therapy house calls where we do physical therapy in people's homes, hospice, palliative care, and we have 3 physician practices. So a lot of our board members and trustees, oftentimes when they're new to the organization, will say, why do you do so many things? You have all these competitors and they all specialize and put you at a disadvantage and you're spreading yourselves too thin. And our viewpoint is that we are here to service the older population and their families. And by offering this breadth of services, we do 2 things. First of all, we can talk to people about their needs and we can fulfill their needs the best way for them, as opposed to us offering just a couple of services and seeing where they can best fit in. And then we also, by having that continuum, when people do come to us for the right service, we have a continuum. So if their needs evolve, usually their needs grow. But sometimes when people get into our environments with the stimulation, their needs actually lessen. So sometimes people can come into assisted living and go back to independent living for a while. So it really provides us the opportunity to be totally person-centered, and it's wonderful.
So there's a pretty broad scope in terms of the type of services that are performed. What is the geographic scope? Do you think of yourself as a Boston organization, or what do you think of it that way?
Yeah, we really we kind of divide up what we do into 2 buckets. As far as direct services, people getting healthcare from us, people living in our communities, it's very much of a Eastern Massachusetts focus. We are primarily in the Boston area up to Revere and down to the South Shore. We are looking at some things on Cape Cod, and out to like Central Massachusetts is really the direct market. But then indirectly, we teach over 1,000 students on an annual basis through our Harvard Medical School affiliation, and nursing students and physical therapy students and pharmacy students from other schools. And we also do a huge amount of research. So that really is global, the impact of that.
Now, you mentioned when you arrived at HSL, they had split apart the CEO and president role, which previously been in one, and you were president, and now you've kind of reunited that. So what has the process been like there? What have you observed and kind of learned along the way of doing that?
It's a great question. When I came, I was the president, and I was the president under the CEO from the fall of 2009 until the fall of 2012. So it's 3 years. And at that point, the CEO decided to move on to a more academic position. And the board asked me if we could put their jobs back together again. I am somebody who very much likes the head up part of the job as far as thinking about strategy, thinking about the future, how we can best integrate with the community and the state and federal government. But I also really do enjoy the operations, and I do feel as though it's critical to connect the two. So the jobs were put back together, and I took that job over in spring of 2013. After that, the next few months kind of evolved. I have now been doing that for 8.5 years, the combined job. For me, it's been great. I've really enjoyed both sides of it. And when I do the head up part of the job, having more of the head down part of the job as well allows me to talk about what we do in a much more knowledgeable, enthusiastic way. As we think about the future and think about the next person, we actually aren't sure if we want to keep it together or not. It depends on the candidate. So when that time comes, I think we will be open-minded about whether or not it stays that way or whether there's a chief operating officer or exactly how that goes. So I think that does depend on the people and their interests and their abilities.
So the last couple of years have been a challenge. And in some ways, the elder care facilities have been ground zero, for the health crisis that we have experienced. And, my question is sort of like, were you ready? Although I think nobody was exactly ready, but, how did it go?
Yes, so that is a really good question. I believe that we were as ready as anybody could have been. We are an organization, we have 2,600 employees. We care for a little over 3,000 seniors on a daily basis. We've always had an orientation, as I said, to be very person-focused, to be very responsive to the needs of the people we care for, to always be thinking about them proactively, what they can accomplish and all. So we're not an organization like some, which I pejoratively refer to as warehouses, where people live there and they're not really caring for them as people so much as they're just giving them shelter. So because of that, we were very ready to care for people as much as possible, both in terms of, we're very, very strong infection control department because we're a healthcare organization, we have a hospital. So we were able to deploy our infection control people in our housing sites. So, I would say from a health status perspective, we were much more prepared than most. We had our chief nursing officer, our chief medical officer. We had, a lot of very capable people thinking about what can we do in the housing sites. And we also, because we keep our residents and our patients so active, we were very focused on not only keeping them safe, but keeping them active and vital. And, from day one, focusing on that as well. And we're also, I would say the last thing is, we've always been a very communicative organization, communicating with our residents and our patients and having them be part of the team and also their families. So we were very prepared to put all those things into place, which were all the things you had to do. At the very beginning, none of us knew that, for instance, asymptomatic people were contagious. So one of our communities is the Jack Satter House in Revere. Revere was one of the very first cities in the Commonwealth to erupt. So one of our communities, the Jack Satter House, was one of the very first places to have a problem. I found myself on Revere Beach Boulevard with 7 or 8 newscasters and cameras talking about what was happening because it got a lot of focus. And it really, because we're an organization that is a teaching organization, I really took the opportunity to not be defensive and say, try to make believe it wasn't serious, but took it as an opportunity to really tell the community that this is real, that everybody should pay attention, and that if this could happen to us, it could happen to anybody because we are so high caliber. So I'm very happy with the way, we were prepared to handle it.
The last couple of years have been a challenge for, I think, anybody working in healthcare, certainly, direct patient or resident care. How have things gone with the staff? I'm sure not immune from all the challenges that are out there, but how have you tried to manage that and how has it gone?
That's really important. Before the pandemic, I would say we have recognized for a very long time that our staff is core to everything we do. When you look at the satisfaction, when you look at the care given, we're not an organization that makes widgets and puts it on a shelf and people buy it. Our people are our service. So we have for a long time worked closely with our staff about their work experience. We were fortunate that the last 4 times we've applied for the Boston Globe Top Places to Work survey, we have been named one of Boston's top places to work, which, considering how many of our employees are doing incredibly hard work, are oftentimes treated not as well as they should be by patients with some level of dementia, and they're not many of them the highest compensated people in the world. It's pretty remarkable. So we've had that relationship. This was a particularly challenging time for our staff. They have been amazing. They have, throughout this, come to work, put their lives at stake, put their families' lives at stake. But right from the start, we put our staff up in hotels. We brought them meals. We brought them breakfast. We brought them lunch. We did as much as we possibly could to support them. I would say that as people are reading throughout the industry and throughout, other industries, people are somewhat burnt out a year and a half later, or
wherever we are. Yeah.
And the fact that so many people were hesitant about getting vaccinated was something that really was discouraging for healthcare workers, to know what they had been through and all the celebrations, and healthcare workers are our heroes. And then when it came time for people to actually do something very proactive that could help them and help the healthcare workers take the pressure off, there was so much hesitancy for what people perceived as not very good reasons. So we have more vacancies than we typically do. It has not been because of more resignations or retirements, though. It's really been more because it's harder to hire people.
Yeah.
So the departure rate. But we have a lot of mental health benefits for people. We have a very good group of geriatric psychiatrists who have spent most of their pre-pandemic time caring for patients and residents, but they spent a lot of their time, the first year particularly, supporting our employees. Because we're a Jewish faith-based organization, we have probably 12 spiritual care employees who were spending a lot of their time with staff as well. So we've supported them quite a bit. And we just did the most recent Boston Globe survey and really got a lot of wonderful feedback about how we cared for them and treated them. So it's gone well on that front as well.
So let's look ahead a little bit. And one thing you talk about is redefining the experience of aging. And this may go back a little bit to what we were talking about with the Muppets before, but what do you mean when you talk about redefining the experience of aging?
So in healthcare, a lot of people talk about the triple aim. They talk about and the triple aim basically is people's health status, people's satisfaction with life, and people's and the cost of care. So I think in a large degree, we've defined it in that way. People are living longer. People are getting different forms of dementia at a higher incidence than they used to. Not just because more people are getting older, but there's actually a higher incidence. And a lot of hypotheses why, but a lot of it is high-fat diets and a lot of the same reasons people are getting to diabetes more and things. And the cost of caring for older people, because so few people have funds, that it's really becoming more and more of a burden on state and federal payers. Before the pandemic, Mass Health, which pays for older people in nursing homes, was like 45% of the Massachusetts budget, and it's growing, and it's taking money away from highways and schools and police and fire and everything. So we really define that redefinition of aging as taking what's now the baby boomer generation, because the leading edge of the baby boomers are now turning 75-ish. And the baby boomers have different expectations. So we really want aging to be a wonderful experience. We want people to have purpose. We want to be in an environment where we help them set goals and we help them achieve those goals and see there's a lot of things they could do that they've never done before, things they could be doing that they did 30 years ago that they thought they couldn't do anymore. And so a lot of it is, it's about being healthier, cognitively, physically, spiritually. It's about being in environments that really provide them with an opportunity to live their very best life. And it also is having enough of an array of services and support in people's homes and in congregate settings so that people can live in the least restrictive and least costly environment possible to help them and the government as far as the cost of care.
You know, Lou, when I was growing up, there was the term senior citizen. I think senior came in only, you know, after I was like soon after I graduated from college or high school. And I remember thinking that they're not a senior, you know, I'm a senior. But at that time, we also talked about, you know, age 65. Now the terminology's changed. I still hear age 65 as a senior. I mean, is that the right age? People, does that mean anything?
I'm 67, so I don't think so.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny, we struggle with terminology, and a lot of older adults, I gravitate to older adults more often than I do seniors these days.
Yeah.
I always thought seniors was a great term because it's like, you know, you're a senior, I'm only a freshman.
Yeah.
It's like a great thing to be a senior.
Yeah.
So it does gravitate back and forth, but there's no question that we view the population we care for more 75 and over.
Yeah.
That window of 65 to early 70s, I don't think any of us view that as this, you know, it's the senior population. I think our little senior leadership team, there's the word senior again, which is a very positive term. So our senior leadership team is 12 people, and you know, half of us are either over 65 or close to it. So
yeah,
you know, we certainly think that has to change. People viewing 65 as retirement age and all is not productive anymore.
But I mean, I expect you might have just a different view from what you're doing, but is it still sort of the general, I mean, is the society kind of behind on that of still making 65 is kind of the marker, and that hasn't moved as much as maybe, you know, some other sorts of thresholds or benchmarks?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think societally people still view that as kind of, you know, older people, older adults. There's no question, you know. I live on the Newbridge campus. One of the benefits of my job was a pre-existing house there. So I interact quite a bit with the people at Newbridge, and the average age of our residents in independent living at Newbridge and Orchard Cove is 88, 87. Yeah. So, you know, I talk to those people, and they say, "Oh, you're such a baby."
Yeah.
So it's, you know, I live in that context. So
yeah.
I don't view it. I feel very young when I'm with those folks.
That's good. Now, you have some ambitious plans as HSL, and I don't know where they stand now, but I know talking about building, you know, physical infrastructure in Brookline, you know, where I'm located, and elsewhere. Where do those plans stand these days?
We are making a lot of progress. I think just as our history has evolved from being really a long-term care organization to more and more opportunities to live independently, live at home. So I would say our future plans really fall into three areas. One is we are building more infrastructure. We are expanding our community in Brookline, and that is not only more apartments, low-income apartments, but also a community center to support the other people who live in Coolidge Corner so they can stay home longer, and the people who are in the existing buildings have a more robust community center to have activities and all, as an extension of the senior center, which is right behind us. We're also expanding our community in Randolph, making that bigger. And I would say we have three other projects, one in Dorchester, one in Everett, and another one in Stoughton, that are all within a few years of developing more bricks and mortar, because there really is a great shortage of congregate affordable housing with services for older adults. And that also helps draw some of those older adults out of their homes with putting them in an environment that's much more productive and much more, keeping people company and having activities. And it makes that housing available for younger families, which is such a problem in our community as well. So the next thing I would say we're doing is there are over 100,000 older adults in Massachusetts who live in affordable housing, congregate affordable housing, and many of those communities have very few services. So we are focusing more on what we refer to as HSL inside, where we can go and provide services to those people in other people's buildings to really enhance those people's lives and keep them living there longer and keeping them out of nursing homes. And then the last thing is really doing more in people's homes. We have a wide array of home and community-based services now, and we're looking at a program called HSL at Home, which is really having people, while they still live in their individual homes, become members of, in some way, of Hebrew Senior Life, where they would get more services at home and also kind of be part of a community. They could come, do activities, and then get familiar with it. So when it does come time for a congregate setting being more appropriate, they would feel very comfortable kind of sliding into that, and it would get rid of some of the resistance that causes some people to move into those settings later than they subsequently realize they should have.
Lou, you mentioned earlier on that there is a lot more dementia these days, partly because people are living longer, but also a higher incidence, due to environmental or other factors. Yeah. What are you doing to address that population of patients, but also their families, where it really takes a big toll?
That's a terrific question. Thanks for asking that. So I mentioned one of my first jobs in healthcare was going to the Baptist to help create the Orthopedic Center of Excellence. And in the greater Boston area, you have places like the Baptist, you have the Joslin Diabetes Center, you have Dana-Farber, Boston Children's Hospital. You have these amazing centers of excellence where people who need those services get a cocoon where they focus on prevention and diagnosis and treatment and rehab and family education and all. And in our community, we're very fortunate to live in a community that has amazing healthcare. And you will regularly talk to people who have had healthcare problems, who will talk about the unfortunate situation they went through, but they will rave about how the Boston healthcare system was there for them. I would challenge you or anybody I've ever talked to or anybody in your audience to ever meet anybody that had dementia in their family who will say that the healthcare system was there for them, and that they had a comprehensive service that could really help them. So several years ago, we committed to starting the ball rolling on developing a dementia center of excellence. That has evolved. It is now the Deanna and Sydney Woolf Center for Memory Health. We are in our 5th year of that work, and it's a service that is meant to work with others. We don't have to do everything ourselves, but it's meant to be that glue. So people have a resource that they can come to for prevention, for treatment, for diagnosis, for family support. We have now developed, I think, 7 or 8 different services, and they include primarily, those services for the patient, and a lot of services for our families, because a lot of the research we've done in our organization has been around different forms of dementia. And there is a lot of understanding about the course of the disease and how family members can respond to different challenges when the disease manifests itself. And there's a lot of education that we can provide families of what to expect. And when you see a rapid increase in cognitive decline, it's not because all of a sudden the dementia got worse all of a sudden. It is probably because of a case of delirium, because of a urinary tract infection. So rather than going to the hospital and freaking out and having it actually get worse permanently, because that kind of an experience actually can make it worse permanently, if you just keep an antibiotic in your medicine cabinet and do that first, you are much more likely to nip in the bud, and it'll be a transient episode that lasts a day, and you're back to normal. So there's a lot of education that's very helpful, and a lot of hand-holding that we're really focusing our attention on. So that is a really important focus for us going forward.
Well, Lou, I do hope that there'll be the day when people can say they came to Boston not just for children's care or diabetes or cancer, but dementia as well. So no pressure, but I do expect you to follow through on that.
That is the goal.
Good. Now, Lou, I want to ask a final question, which is if you had time to read any books that you might recommend to the audience, or if you've read something and you say, you know what, I really recommend you don't read this. So either way.
Yeah. So one thing I would say is Atul Gawande's Being Mortal is something that is really worth everybody reading. I think it's a great perspective that's very consistent with ours about focusing on what matters most to people, and it's an incredibly helpful tool to understand older adults and the perspective that one should have. I would also say books on, it's not a specific book, but as far as career development, I really recommend people understand the concept of servant leadership, because I believe that that is an extraordinarily helpful approach to leadership, to really take the view that you are leading in a way that is a servant to the people you're serving, and even the people who report to you. Where you are here to help, and you are here to strengthen other people and leverage their abilities more so. And that is an orientation that I think is incredibly helpful for anybody who is in their career. There's another book I would say. There's a book called Change the Culture, Change the Game by Roger Connors and Tom Smith, which is also a book about leadership. And it's a book about culture and about developing organizational culture. And a lot of people say that, geez, culture, it's really hard to change an organization's culture. And I am a firm believer that everything you do every day is changing your organizational culture. So you may as well do it on purpose.
Yeah.
And there's so much you can do. I was at North Shore Medical Center for 7 years. And we had a merger had taken place between Salem Hospital and Union Hospital, and organizations with very different cultures, and which is when I first started this work. And then when I came to Hebrew SeniorLife, there was the job I had was president over a number of different communities, as I mentioned, Newbridge and Orchard Cove, and the different affordable housing sites, and they all had very different cultures. And to really work with a group of people and decide, what is it we're trying to accomplish? What are the best actions we can take in order to achieve those goals? But most importantly, defining our culture and how is it that we treat each other and how we work together, and what kind of experiences are we trying to manifest and communicate to our staff for people to understand the organization, understand how we should work together and best accomplish our goals. And it's something that I believe, whether it was at North Shore or whether it was here, dramatic impact on the culture of the organization, people's satisfaction working there, people's ability to really thrive there. So I think that particular book is a really wonderful one on how to change a culture that I've really followed and really enjoyed.
Great. Well, Lou Woolf, President and CEO of Hebrew SeniorLife, thank you for sharing your experience, your wisdom, the story of HSL, and those book recommendations. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, David. Anytime.
You've been listening to the HealthBiz podcast with me, David Williams, President of Health Business Group. I conduct in-depth interviews with leaders in healthcare business and policy. If you like what you hear, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite service. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe on your second and third favorite services as well. There's more good stuff to come, and you won't want to miss an episode. If your organization is seeking strategy consulting services in healthcare, check out our website, healthbusinessgroup.com.